What's up YouTube, Cliff here from the Sunday Drive, and today we're going to be installing a 7-inch Skyjacker lift on this 2016 Silverado. If you're interested in getting your own Skyjacker lift kit, we are dealers for Skyjacker through Keys Motorsports that I also work for. So definitely hit us up. We'll have a link to this kit in the description of the video. So we're sitting in front of my buddy's 2016 Silverado 1500, and today we're going to be lifting this truck. And we've decided to go with a Skyjacker lift kit, and this is their 6 to 7 inch lift kit depending on the exact components and configuration that you select. And once we're done, we're going to be putting some 35-inch tires on it, and these are paired with some Havoc wheels. These are 20x10s with a -24 offset. Now you can pair this kit with optional front coilovers, however at this time we decided just to stick with the basic kit. We went with the Nitro rear shocks. There are multiple shock options you can select with this kit. You have front cross members, knuckles, rear spacers for the leaf springs at the back of the truck, spacers for your front struts, new mounts for the differential. You're also going to have a skid plate for your front differential, new end links for your sway bar, as well as some spacers for that. You're going to have some U-bolts, CV axle spacers, brackets for your brake line and emergency brake line, new front stainless steel brake lines, and then a whole bunch of other assorted hardware and bolts. It's just a really nice kit. It seems to come with everything that we're going to need. And we are going to have the specs and description of all of these parts and components that we're using on this truck in the description of this video. In a follow-up video, we'll be installing these Weston side steps, and we'll have that linked in the description of this video, as well as changing out the front and rear bow ties, so definitely stick around for that, and I'm sure we're going to have more content coming on this truck. But for this video, let's get started, get this lift kit put on here, and see how she looks.
The struggle. 2 lug nuts in.
Whenever working with a lift or even just jacks and jack stands, it's important to make sure that you're keeping your truck balanced, especially if you have it up in the air like this. You're removing a lot of the weight from the front of the vehicle, so just be conscientious of that and try to keep the truck balanced while you're removing different components and adding new ones. So as you mentioned, they have a really nice set of instructions that come with this. They break down all the part numbers and everything for you, and at the back they're going to have all your torque specs that you're going to need. First thing we did is actually remove the wheels. Now one thing I will disagree with, they say to use a 22mm socket. In my experience, a 7/8 socket works much better. With the OEM lugs, they're actually a 2-piece lug, and the top is kind of a soft aluminum, and it tends to get stuck on the 22 and it's hard to get out, but a 7/8 gives it just a little bit of space around the socket so that, or around the lug nut, so that it'll come out of your socket once you get it removed. Now we're going to go ahead and throw that away and show you guys what to do. We're going to remove the mud flap because that is not going to fit with the new wheel setup. There's 2 T15s on the bottom here, and there's another T15 right up under here towards the back of the truck, and we're going to put those back in when we're done so that water doesn't get inside the fender. And then we got 2 T30s at the top right here. And then this will just pull away. There's some double-sided tape on the side of the truck that we will remove later. And I'm going to put these 2 T30s back in right now, again, just so you don't want water getting inside your fender and rusting that out. So go ahead and remove your fender liner. Now for this generation Silverado, GM used 3 different types of control arms. They have the cast aluminum ones, which you see here. They also had a forged steel version as well as a stamped steel version. So make sure that you're using the correct knuckles depending upon which control arms you have, and I'll have a link to a web page on their site that explains why you need to make sure you get the correct knuckle. Then whenever working on suspension, it's always a good idea to spray everything down with PB Blaster that you're going to have to remove. It's just going to make your life a lot easier. Well, maybe not a lot, but at least a little bit easier. First, we're going to disconnect the tie rod, and we're just going to break this real quick with the impact, but then we're going to remove it by hand. It's a 21mm. Now I don't have a 21mm wrench, but a 13/16 will fit this perfectly. And then you can take a 10mm and put that on the bolt. All right, so what I'm doing is just letting the 10mm jam up against the rotor here. We're going to remove the entire caliper and bracket is one unit. You're going to need an 18mm socket. There's a brake line bracket right here on the upper control arm. Remove that with a 10mm. I'm going to pull off. And I'm going to disconnect the ABS sensor up top. And get a little more leverage, you can pull the clips out that hold it into the frame. Once you pull up the red clip, you can just press down on the black tab and pull out the connection. And we're going to remove it from that clip right here too. There you go. Set that out of the way. You can either take a flathead screwdriver or a pry bar like this and release the caliper from the rotor. And now, because we are replacing the brake lines, I'm going to disconnect the brake line from the caliper so that we can completely remove it and get it out of our way. You're going to want a 7/16 wrench to remove the banjo bolt, and then once the bolt is removed, we're going to use a little tool like this that you can pick up, and this will basically prevent the fluid from leaking out. Just remove this as quickly as you can, and I have the caliper sitting up here so that none of the fluid in the caliper will leak out and make a mess. Now, banjo bolts always have a crush washer on the bottom, and usually because they're a crush washer, they are kind of hard to get off. So you're going to have to pry that off of there to remove that banjo bolt. Now, once you get it that far, if you're still having trouble with it, you can take a pair of snips, cut the washer off, and then you can just slide your tool on, and that'll prevent it from leaking. With the brake line disconnected, I'm going to make sure I keep the opening in the upright position. Just make sure you're careful where you set this. You don't want anything falling down inside of your brake caliper. So we're going to just move this out of the way. Now we're going to disconnect the end link. This has a 15mm bolt and a 15mm nut. Now we're going to go to the other side and do the same thing. Underneath the truck, there are two brackets that hold the sway bar in place. We're going to remove those, and they're held in by 10mm bolts. Remove the two 15mm bolts that hold in the bottom of your front strut. Now we need to remove the three nuts that are holding in the top of your strut. On a couple of the bolts, there are some retaining clips that are holding the wires in place, so we're going to pop those off. Go ahead and make sure you soak these down with PB Blaster. Just take an 18mm wrench or socket and remove these three top nuts. Now we're going to disconnect the lower control arm from the knuckle. This is a 24mm nut on here. We're going to break it free with the impact. Now we're going to take a 24mm wrench and a 5/16 Allen key and work this off the rest of the way.
Thank God this pole is here. Right.
And just in case you're wondering why we're using a boot, this sucks. It's only a 3-year-old truck.
What a stretch.
We're going to go ahead and remove the rotor. It has a T30 Torx retaining bolt. So we removed the nut from the ball joint in the bottom control arm, but we're going to let the control arm sit in there. Now we're going to remove the 18mm nut that's holding the top ball joint into the knuckle. So first we're just going to break that free. If it does start to spin, you need to put a 6mm Allen key in the bolt, but this one seems to be coming out. Now we're going to remove the center nut on the axle using a 36mm socket.
I think you're supposed to yell, get on the ground. Dr. Pepper! What are they selling?
Chocolate!
Chocolate!
They said they're selling chocolate!
I love chocolate!
It'll make you live forever.
Give it to me.
Oh my! Holy crap!
Get on the ground!
Holy crap! Look how easy that was. Look at it. Alright.
Now, if you have a hard time removing either of your control arms from the knuckle, make sure that you don't hit the ball joint directly or on top of the control arm directly. You want to hit the knuckle to get the ball joint to release. So we had a little bit of trouble getting this top ball joint to come out of the knuckle. So what we did is we put a jack stand under the lower control arm and then lowered the truck down so that it would take some of the pressure off of this upper ball joint. And then we were able to hit the knuckle with a hammer and pry up on the bottom of the ball joint and get that to pop out. So now you don't necessarily want to pry on the bottom of your ball joint if you can avoid it, but sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. All right. With that upper ball joint removed, we're gonna push down on the lower control arm and slide the axle out. That should drop.
Axle's out. Now this one.
Now we're going to remove the axle. This is held in by 15mm bolts. And once you have those bolts removed, you can pull this out. Now don't let this deceive you. We had to spend a while hitting on here with a mallet to get this to release. Trying to pry between didn't really work. It was just a matter of slowly loosening it, but with a rubber mallet on here. We did use some PB Blaster. You can see that right here, there's corrosion all on this mating surface right here. So it was completely sticking to that. So it may be a little bit of work to get this off. All right, now that one did just come right out. Remove your lower control arms. The bolt is 18mm and the nut is 24. We're going to go ahead and move the splash shield underneath the truck. Up front we have two 15mm bolts. There's two 15mm at the rear. Go ahead and remove the four 10mm bolts.
You're following me? That's perfect.
Remove these two skid plates right here. The rear bolts were already removed when we dropped the splash shield, and the fronts are held in by one 15mm bolt each. When they undercoated the truck from the factory, obviously they covered these bolts right here, so we're going to clean off the undercoating. With the threads cleaned off, use a 18mm socket and wrench to remove the four nuts on the rear crossmember bolts. Now be careful while you remove these bolts, because obviously this crossmember is going to want to come down. Next, we're going to be disconnecting the rack and pinion, and just to be safe, we're roping up the steering wheel so that it can't turn freely. I made the mistake in my Camaro when I was doing a motor swap to not secure my wheel, and it spun freely and it broke my clock spring. So may not be necessary in this case, but just to be safe, we are securing it to make sure that we don't break our clock spring. Now we need to remove the rack and pinion, so first we're going to disconnect all the electrical connections. So these all have locking pins. You're going to want to slide back and then push the tab in, or maybe that'll just fall off. There we go. So we only need to disconnect these bottom two connections right here because this third one actually connects to another part of the steering rack here. And there's one more connection on the top of the rack and pinion right up here. Okay, and that's loose. Remove your steering shaft using 11mm socket. We've supported the rack and pinion with a transmission jack right here. It's a good idea to have another person under it because it is pretty long and you don't want it twisting and falling out of there. So you have two 24mm bolts on the driver's side, and then there's two 18mm bolts on the passenger side. One is through the front crossmember right here, and the other one is right above it. Coming out. Okay, come down, bring it down. I'd rather find out when it's a little lower. It's not light. All right, I got it. There's your rack and pinion out. Next, we're going to disconnect the front drive shaft from the differential. It's held in by four 11mm bolts. Now we need to lower the differential, so you're going to want to have a transmission jack supporting it. Obviously, if you're up on a lift, if you're down on the ground, just any regular floor jack will work. First, disconnect the electrical connection. It has a tab like all the other ones that you have to pull back, and then you can press down or use a pick tool to lift up on and release the connection. Since this end is supported by the jack stand, I'm going to remove the two 18mm on this side. There's one right in front of the axle and one right behind the axle. And now we're going to use a 21mm socket on this side. There's one again right in the front and one right in the back. Just make sure you have your differential supported. You're holding the differential?
Yep.
There it goes. All right. Now that we have it down a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect those wire connections that are held onto the differential. There's another connection right up top here that we got to disconnect. Okay. There's one more right around here at the front of the differential. All right, so that's those disconnected. On the front of the differential is also a breather valve that you need to remove. Well, let's lift it off first.
Oh!
All right, never mind. I'll get that end. You get this end. Yeah, that's heavy.
Who says that?
Set it down. Just set it down.
Yeah, now you know why I went, ooh.
So we have our differential down, and you can see we've made some marks on here. So we need to take off this front ear right here and a little bit off the back. What you're gonna do is measure 0.625 from the inside of this eyelet right here to the back. Basically what you wanna do, you can see where the old piece was installed, where the corrosion is right up there. So you wanna kinda just take this straight along the back edge. And then up front, you're basically taking off the entire ear so that if you look down, it'll look straight with the shaft coming down here to the side. So you also want to cut off this corner because there's a support that comes up and holds this piece in place, and you're going to go 0.8 inches back from this front edge right here and basically cut all of this off. So they give you a nice little diagram that shows you the dimensions, and when you are done, this is basically what you should be left with. So like I said, you want this front edge to be straight down with the shaft coming off towards the passenger side, and then the back should be straight as well. Once that's cut off, you're going to be installing this new bracket right here. It's basically going to wrap around this shaft with a U-bolt, and you're going to reuse this back mount right there. And then there's a bracket that goes on this side as well.
Whew, I think I'm deaf.
We need to remove 3.5 inches from the rear cross member support bracket right here. So basically you're going to measure from here back 3.5 inches and cut that off. Perfect. The new front cross member is going to install right underneath of the existing cross member, and we need to square up this inside edge so that it can fit up in here. So we're just going to square these rounded corners up. Now that we have everything cut, we're going to start reassembling the front end. So the first thing you want to put back in is your rack and pinion. You have your two 24mm bolts and then the two 18s. Now I'm just putting my impact on the lowest torque setting, so I'm making sure that it's not cross-threading. Okay. All right, so we got that one started. Now you don't want to tighten those down all the way until you have the other bolts in too. When you're reinstalling the rack and pinion, make sure that you feed the wire between your front cross member here and the rack and pinion. I did not do that, so I had to kind of fish it around. So just make sure you feed that correctly. Reconnect the electrical connections. You got to reconnect your steering shaft. So this is the new passenger side mounting bracket for the differential. So you're going to want to come from the outside right here and sneak that up. It can be a little bit challenging, but it does fit. There you go. So basically want to come from the outside of the rack and pinion and then slide it onto the bolts. I'm putting a little bit of anti-seize onto these because this was really corroded. On the driver's side, you want to put the tall edge of the bracket towards the front. You want this little notch right here at the back. Reinstall the 18mm bolts. And again, just putting some anti-seize onto these bolts. For the front bolt, you can get a torque wrench on there. You just need to lift up on the bracket and put it on.
3, 2, 1, go. Oh, action.
Reinstall the brackets that hold the drive shaft into the differential. These are held in by 11mm. Now I'm not sure if this matters or not, but when we uninstalled the drive shaft from the differential, the T was facing in this orientation on both sides. So basically the T was pointing outwards on both sides. So normally when you reinstall your electrical connection, you would wrap it around here. However, because this is now lower, this puts a unnecessary tension on the line. So what we're gonna do is just sneak this through or on the front and plug it in directly there. And that'll give us a little extra slack. The package with the bolts for your differential is HB C1466DS. Your fine thread bolts, there's 2 of them. They go over on the driver's side. Okay, here's the washer. Okay, you got one.
The wheel hubs. Oh, look at that.
Now take your coarse thread bolt on the passenger side. Make sure to install what they call a spacer. Really, it's just a washer that's making this circle here a little bit smaller so that it fits the bolt more snugly. Now we're choosing to drop the bolts down and tighten the nuts from the bottom just because it's going to be a little bit easier to work on those rather than trying to fit a ratchet up top. Now we had an issue with this bolt that goes in right here where the nut threads were just off, but we weren't able to get it on running an impact back and forth on it. Definitely make sure it's going to work before you put it on there. You may want to buy a different nut for this if you're running into the same trouble. You're going to want a 24 on the bottom and then a 13/16 will hold the top. So I have the wrench braced against this right here. I'm torquing it down. Definitely a long torque wrench when doing a lift kit is definitely helpful. Gives you a lot more leverage. And as with all of our stuff, we'll have all our tools linked in the description of this video. Because we're routing this wire a little differently, I'm just going to zip tie it to these other wires right here. All right, just make sure you're not pinching it with your U-bolt and it's outside of that. And then right up here, I just slid this one clip down and clipped it back into its old spot on the differential. Use a 5/8 inch ratchet to tighten down the nuts on the U-bolt. When you first put your front differential back in, don't tighten everything down completely, just get it lined up and then check your clearance right here on the passenger side. So we actually found that it was hitting the rack and pinion now just barely, but we don't want this touching here, so we just dropped it about 6 inches, ground this back a little bit more, and then we were able to put it back up and have no issues. On the driver's side, there are 2 3/4 inch bolts, holding those up top with a wrench, or finches, thank you. And on the bottom, we have 3/4 inch nuts.
Ow! Ow! Let go! Oh! Oh!
All right, you need a break. Let's get a longer thing on that.
Hello!
Will it just be, will it hold itself there and it will hold itself there, right?
Yeah, it will. It'll hold itself there.
Push it back towards me a little.
Okay.
Go ahead and install the rear cross member. All right, for the front and rear cross member supports, you need accessory bag HB C7662 CM. You're gonna have these nice big bolts. You can put these on with 15/16 or 24 millimeter.
Can he do it? Oh yeah, there you go. Right, oh yeah. There you go.
If you have the optional differential anti-torque arm, it would bolt up between the front cross member and right here. So if you have that, this is where it's going to go. Now we're going to install the extruded U-nuts from bag HB C1466 SKD skid. So these are to hold in the front skid plate. These are 9/16 bolts. Since these are extruded U-nuts, I'm not going to go crazy tightening these down. Just want to make sure they're snug. So now we're going to install the top spacers on the front struts, and you're going to reuse the OEM nuts in here. Tighten these up with an 18mm socket. All right, so put that up in there, and then take the supplied bolts and tighten that down, and I will find the packaging in 1 second and let you guys know what that is. And we're back. So the package that those 10mm nuts come in is HB 10mm NFN. I'm using a 5/8 wrench. Now, one thing you don't want to forget is the breather valve on your front differential. You can see the nipple for it is right here. Now the line for it obviously no longer reaches because we've lowered the differential. So you can see here's the line I'm pulling down on it. However, there is plenty of slack at the top if you can pull it down. So if we move up here, here is that breather line coming up right here, and it slips down through this wire loom. So what's holding it in place right now is this tape. So we're going to remove the electrical tape up here so that we can pull the line back down. It looks like inside of the wire loom, the wire and tape are actually taped together. So I'm pulling on it, I'm getting it to come. You can see down here you kind of have some of the sticky residue from the tape. And I actually think I got it down far enough. All right, managed to grab it. Here we go. So I'm just gonna pull that a little more. All right, now we're gonna reinstall the lower control arm. Now tighten these back down, 18 on the bolt, 24 on the nut. Now we need to remove the tie rod end because we have to actually make it a little bit shorter to work with the new suspension. So what we're going to do is try to leave the locking nut in place. That's what I have the 24mm wrench on, and then I have an adjustable wrench with this breaker bar set up on it, and we're going to try to break this free. Got it. This was really full of a lot of rust, so we took a wire brush on my drill, really cleaned it off, but this was still on here pretty tight and we needed to break that free, so I was able to get a 16mm up on the flat part right here. I was able to break this free, work this off. I removed it completely and took the wire wheel and just went up and down this, and then once I had cleaned it really good, I impacted this all the way up so that all the threads cleaned themselves, and I took the nut off and wire brushed it some more. So now what we need to do is remove a 1/2 inch off the end here and remove a 1/2 inch off the end of this. And what Skyjacker recommends that you do is you leave the nut on here so that after you're done cutting a 1/2 inch off here, you can then chase the threads off with this nut so that you'll get rid of any of the burrs. One of the things I really like about this kit is they give you the flexibility to install it as a 6-inch lift or a 7-inch lift. We're going to be installing the 7-inch lift on this truck. So they give you optional front spacers. These go below the struts, and they give you longer bolts to install those with. And then at the back, you have these blocks. And basically what you want to do, if you want the 6-inch lift, you're going to remove your factory blocks and install just these new blocks. And if you want to go to the 7-inch lift, you're going to install these on top of the factory parts. So you have that flexibility depending on what you want to do. As I said, we're going to go with the 7-inch, so we're going to be installing these additional front spacers and put these on top of the existing blocks. The front spacers and longer bolts come in part bag HB C1466 LSP. Slide the new spacer in from the back. All right, with that one lined up, I'm going to put the bolt on the other side. Use the 18mm socket to tighten it up. In front of me, I have what appears to be two identical knuckles. However, you'll notice that on the bottom, they end in either a -A or -S. As we mentioned in the beginning of the video, if you have the aluminum control arms, you want to make sure that yours ends in a -A. If you have any other control arms, you want the ones that end in a -S. So that stands for aluminum or steel. Even though these look identical, where these are not is where the ball joints tie into the knuckles. They are larger diameter holes for the aluminum ones and smaller on the steel. So make sure you get the right ones. Now we're going to remove the hub from the Old Knuckle. These are all 18mm bolts. I'm going to disconnect this bracket up top, held in by a 10mm. So we set these side by side. You can see the difference right here. So we're just going to put a little bit of grease around here again in case this ever needs to come off. There is some grease on there from the factory. If you look at the back of the dust shield, it has an R for right, or the passenger side. So take the right knuckle and you just set that on top. Something we should have done before we took anything off, but lessons learned. We wire brushed these, then we ran the nut up and down a few times, then wire brushed it some more so that we can put the nut on and off by hand super easily so we won't have any problems securing the knuckle. For that, so we have the nut for the lower ball joint holding this in place and the nut on the tie rod end right here. So now we're going to put the axle in place, just since we have the best clearance we're going to have for this. Now just to make sure there's not too much strain on this axle while we're working on this, we're just going to tie it up to this upper control arm here. We're going to have to lower the truck down to compress the strut right here. And then once we have this in place, we'll align the axle with the front differential. All right, we got a few threads started. Take the provided spacer and put that in place with the lip. This lip right here facing the inside, so it's going to sit inside the axle coming off the differential. So you're going to want to take a drift pin like this and line up those holes. All right, so we're lined up there. Now you're going to need part bag HB C766 CVS, and this is for your front axle. Since you have a spacer in there now, you're going to need a longer bolt than OEM. Now they sent us 5 of the correct bolts and 7 of the wrong ones. So these are too thick in diameter to go in the hole for the front axles. Luckily we were able to go next door and get the correct bolts. Now make sure that you get grade 8 or 10.9. These are 10.9 and the thread is a 1.5. Take the included thread locker and get a little bit on the end of the bolt there. I'll take an 18mm socket. In order to keep the axle from rotating while we're torquing it down, we put 2 of the lug nuts back on here so that we could hold the axle in place from here. So just to be safe, we're going to go in a crisscross pattern to make sure that this seats evenly. Alright, then just go through and check them all. Put a 6mm hex key in the bottom and an 18mm wrench, and then tighten this up. Use an 8mm Allen key to hold the bolt coming down from the ball joint in place, and use a 24mm wrench to tighten the nut. To fit your stock calipers back on, you're going to need to take a little bit off of this dust shield right here. Here's the new brake lines that Skyjacker includes with the kit. They are longer than OEM, and these are perfectly good to use. However, when we went to install the rear lift, we found that the OEM brake lines, which Skyjacker reuses, they don't supply new brake lines to go at the back, were getting really tight, and we weren't really comfortable installing the rear lift without longer brake lines. So we went with a extended brake line kit from Crown Performance, and they gave us both fronts and rears in the kit. And this is a 6-inch extension over stock, and you can see with these front ones that the Skyjacker brake line is a little bit shorter than the Crown Performance brake line. Another nice feature of the Crown Performance is they include the OEM style bracket that attaches to the upper control arm. So that's just a really nice feature and really lets you route the brake line very nicely. So definitely recommend these. They weren't cheap, but you do get what you pay for, and if you're going to lift your truck properly, I would definitely recommend extending your brake lines, especially in the rear, as you guys will see in a minute. Take your new brake line and just feed it up in there. Now when you're putting the brake line on, you want to make sure you have the right side, so this clamp is going to help you figure that out, and it's going to sit there right like that. They do provide new hardware. You can see this 6-inch extended line fits perfectly. It's routed really nicely. Now we're going to just take the bolt that held in the old bracket, tighten this up with a 10mm socket. Take an 11mm socket and tighten this one up. You just want to snug it enough to crush those washers, but definitely don't want to kill this.
But you should get that license. There's a really good guy in
Make sure to always put anti-seize on these because they are very easy to rust, and then you have to drill them out, which is a pain. And torque to spec. So the nice thing about these new brake lines is we were able to use a bracket, which means we had a place to connect the ABS sensor to. So basically this grommet right here, we slid that up from down this area, used some WD-40 to lubricate it, and we pushed it up here and then re-clipped that in place. Now up top, this used to be clipped up here, so obviously that's not going to reach anymore. So we just unclipped this connection right there to give us some more slack, and then we removed the bracket that was holding this in place right here, and we're going to just take this piece that was included with the kit, install this right here like so. Now they don't really give detailed directions for this part, so we're just reusing the OEM bolt that went into the Old Knuckle. So I'm going to tighten that down in a second, and then I'm just going to use a zip tie to hold the ABS sensor in place, just going through these two holes right here. This will just make sure it doesn't get caught up on anything. And that's just a 10mm, again, just reusing the OEM bolt. Perfect. Just clip that off, and now your ABS sensor shouldn't get caught up on anything. Skyjacker provides these spacers for your sway bars. Now, they want you to reuse your OEM bolts. However, I want to upgrade to some grade 8 bolts just to make sure we don't have any issues. Once you have the brackets installed, you want to grab part bag HBC1466DS, and you're going to take these 4 black bolts, and these are going to hold in your sway bar brackets. First, take your washer and just drop the bolts down in. The 17mm socket on there, you can help it on because you do have to compress the rubber bushing. So now you're going to want to get your end links and part bag HB58XTFW-2. Now, the interesting thing is the instructions we have don't reference this at all, but we did find additional Skyjacker instructions that say this is for your sway bar. And if you look closely at the pictures, you can actually see these installed even in the instructions we have. So this washer slides all the way up to that nut. That's gonna sit right on there. And then you're gonna take the large gold washer that's gonna install on the bottom right there.
That's how that one? That's how that one?
Pull this top boot off. Slide your sway bar through. Put that boot back on. This top washer right there. All right. Take an 18mm wrench on the bottom here, and then torque that to spec. You're gonna need a 17 up top, and torque that down to spec. Reinstalled the washer and nut on your axle right here. And again, this is a 36mm. So we've put some of the old lug nuts on again for this part, and we're gonna hold this from spinning. All right, I got a little bit of a bite. Got it. So we went ahead and centered the steering wheel, and then we measured from the end of the boot to the tie rod end and just made sure that was the same on both sides. Now we are getting the truck aligned right away, but we want to make sure that it's pretty close so that we can get it to the alignment shop safely. And you definitely want to get your vehicle aligned whenever you're doing a lift kit. So we got our adjustable wrench on there and the 24mm right here. We're just going to tighten those down together. All right. Use a 13/16 wrench. If the center bolt is not spinning, just like ours isn't right now, you can put a socket on here and torque it down to spec. That's it, guys. That is the end of part 1 of the Skyjacker lift installation. Now, originally we planned this to be just one video. However, when we sat down and started editing through this, we realized this was going to be much too long. And that is why we decided to break it right here, and why I'm doing an outro in my dining room instead of at the shop with the truck. Now in part 2, we will finish this installation up and show you guys how to remove and install the rear Skyjacker lift on the 2016 Silverado. So we hope you tune back in for that. And if you guys have any comments or questions on how we did the install, please leave that down below and we will do our best to get back to you. Now, as a little bonus for those of you that watched all the way through to the end of this, I can't believe you watched through a 50-minute YouTube video we put together, but thank you for doing that. We have not forgotten the DoD AFM Delete series. We are going to be getting back to that very soon. Unfortunately, the shop that Pete and I were working in, we temporarily lost access to, so we are going to be actually starting to rent that shop on our own and be able to finish that video series up for you guys. So we will be getting that up hopefully in the very near future, as well as a lot more content now that we have a dedicated space to work in. So thank you guys, as always, for your support. We can't do this without you. And speaking of your support, we are trying to diversify our sources of revenue a little bit. So if you guys could go ahead and follow us over on Facebook, we are going to be publishing all our videos on there, as well as all of our Instagram photos go on there. So we could really use the support. If you guys could give us a follow over there, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you as always for watching. We'll see you back here next week for part 2. How would you describe it? All right. All right.
You could do one arm.
Yeah, I just feel like a poser.